My name is Amanda Dowson, and I'm 28 years old. I went to sleep under woven quilts in a crowded barn, guaranteed to hear the scuffle of hooves in my dreams while my family inside the grand house toasted to Christmas with champagne and candlelight. Adopted at age 5 by the Dowson ranchers of Silver Pine, Montana, I was supposed to be their little miracle child. But I was never part of their world, not really. Not after Mama Dowson found out I wasn't blood. After that, I was the barn girl, the outsider, the one who ate last and never at their table. Every Christmas Eve, I'd sit by the fire in the hayloft with my patched coat and these dreams of a family that looked the other way when I came near. I watched their dinners through the dusty window, flutes of wine, laughter, embroidered dresses, and I learned early on that love can be conditional, very conditional. But dreams are funny things, because they don't die. They simmer, they fuel, they take root. On my 18th birthday, I asked for one gift, a seat at their Christmas table. Even once, my adoptive father, Jed Dowson, looked at me like I'd asked to own the moon. He said, "Amanda, it's tradition. It's for family." Not being blood made me not family. I kept my lips shut and went back to the barn. I moved away right after high school, took a job as a wrangler in Colorado, then saved every dollar to start my own small cattle business. By age 25, I owned a herd of top-bred Angus and built a reputation at livestock shows. I was the barn girl who became a heavyweight cattle baroness without Dowson money, without Dowson land. When I first saw my bank balance break $5 million, I wanted to laugh. That number meant more than money. It was the price of every insult, every cold shoulder, every bullet my heart dodged. So this Christmas, I'm going home, back to Silver Pine, back to the snowed-in driveway. And this time, I won't sneak in the hayloft. I walk down the dusty dirt lane leading to the main house. The fields of winter wheat lie flat in the snow. The barn looms behind it, its silhouette familiar like an old scar. Inside the grand foyer, the lights are up. A giant wreath hangs over the fireplace. Wine glasses shimmer on tables. Guests, ranch hands, relatives, and local dignitaries laugh and press coats in the cold entry hall. I pause, adjusting the fur coat I can now afford. My boots click on the wooden floor. Jed spots me. He freezes, then claps once, loud and fake. "Amanda, you made it." His voice is measured, polite, like greeting the help who finally showed up. I smile, very sweetly. "Merry Christmas, Jed." He offers a glass. I take it. They think it's just my first visit in 10 years. They don't know I'm here to roll this estate into the bank. Inside, the living room is packed. Cousins and neighbors, all wrapped in gossip and holiday sweaters. I drift through them, small talk like spurs on my side. Then I stop. Center of the room, all eyes swing to me, and I'm no longer shy. I stand tall, hips squared, the crystal glass cool in my hand. "Merry Christmas," I say loud enough for echoes. They strike quiet. They invited me. I accepted. The silence after I said Merry Christmas hung in the air like frost on glass. Every conversation stopped. Forks paused midair. Even the fireplace crackled more softly, like it too was waiting for what came next. I could feel their eyes on me, the ones who used to call me stray, mudblood, or worse behind my back. My cousin Rebecca, standing in her velvet dress near the tree, nearly dropped her wine glass. Aunt Melanie whispered something behind her fur collar. And Jed Dowson, his face was a mix of discomfort and calculation. He walked over to me with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, now," he said, clapping me on the back. "It's been years since we've had you around the tree. Look at you, all grown up." I gave him a slow smile. "You mean, all grown up for a barn girl, right?" Jed laughed nervously. "Don't be like that, Amanda." I held my wine glass steady, my voice calm. "You know, growing up in that barn, I learned something important. Silence teaches more than sermons. And Christmas in a hayloft builds a thick skin." Some guests laughed awkwardly. Others just looked away. When I was a child, I used to dream that one Christmas they'd let me in, that they'd hang a stocking for me too, that I'd get a seat at the table beside Jed, Mama Dowson, and their children. But the only Christmas gifts I ever received were hand-me-down boots or cracked porcelain dolls from garage sales. And that barn? It didn't even have a working heater. "I remember," I said, locking eyes with Mama Dowson, "being 12 and getting pneumonia on Christmas Eve while y'all sang hymns inside this house. I remember you sent me warm soup." 3 days later, she flinched. Her mascaraed eyes blinked once, hard. Jed tried again. "Look, it was a different time. You were difficult to manage. I was a kid, I shot back, voice steady. And you made sure I knew I was never really yours. The room was growing hotter despite the snow flurrying outside. So why are you here, Amanda? Someone in the room called out, arms crossed. Looking for a reunion? Forgiveness? I turned slowly, taking a breath. No, I said. I'm here to close a deal. Gasps trickled around the room. I pulled a folded legal envelope from my leather bag and placed it on the dining table right next to the Christmas turkey. Jed blinked, confused. What deal? This ranch, I said. I'm buying it, right now, in full. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You can't be serious, he scoffed. I pointed to the envelope. That contains a certified bank draft for $5 million drawn from Claridge Bank of Colorado. I've already spoken with your creditors. You're behind on livestock loans, water rights, and property tax. Your fancy dinner's being hosted on debt. His wife turned pale. I'm offering you a clean break, I continued. Sell the land to me, and I'll preserve it. The workers stay, the cattle stay. But you, I paused. You'll leave. In the morning, Aunt Melanie dropped her glass. The sharp crack of crystal filled the room. Jed's lips curled, desperate. You wouldn't. You're not that kind of girl. No, I replied softly. But I became that kind of woman. The room stayed frozen. I don't want revenge, I added. I want ownership. I want every child who ever slept in a cold barn to know that someday they can own the whole damn ranch. I turned my eyes to the Christmas tree, once a symbol of everything I wasn't allowed near. This year, it was standing in my house, and in the silence that followed, I smiled again, not cruelly, just completely. Jed Dowson didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. His jaw moved like he was chewing glass, eyes flicking from me to the envelope on the table like it might bite him. Aunt Melanie bent down slowly to pick up her shattered wine glass, as if avoiding sudden movements would undo the moment. $5 million, he finally repeated, voice thin. Cash, I added. Not a loan, not a bluff. Mama Dowson finally stood up. Her posture still had that stiff Southern pride elegance, the same kind she used to tower over me when I spilled milk or tracked hay into the back porch. But now, her lips were pale. She looked as though the very foundation of her life had shifted underneath her. You can't just buy a legacy, Amanda, she said coldly. I looked her straight in the eyes. No, but I can buy the land it stands on. And that's what your legacy forgot. It isn't blood that gives power. It's grit. It's showing up, even when you're locked out. I turned to face the room again. When I left this ranch at 18, I didn't even have a car. I hitchhiked halfway to Colorado in the back of a hay truck. I slept in barns, washed dishes, trained horses, and ran cattle till my fingers bled. I built my life out of rejection. A few of the younger cousins watched me like I was something carved from stone. I worked harder than any man you ever hired. I took loans, paid them back, grew one herd into 20. And last year, I got a call Claridge Bank offering me a chance to buy land investments near Silver Pine. Imagine my surprise when I saw this ranch on their foreclosure list. Jed snapped then. We weren't going to lose it. We had a plan. I nodded, voice calm. And now I have a better one. His pride stung deeper than any punch I could throw. The silence was broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock near the stairs, another heirloom I was technically buying. How did we come to this? Mama whispered. Not to me but the room, her voice low. She was just a stray. And now she owns us, Aunt Melanie muttered bitterly. I wasn't here for applause or pity. I was here for the child version of me that used to cry herself to sleep in the hay with frost creeping under the door, for the teenager who never got to wear a dress to the Christmas gala, for the young woman who made her first $10, then her first $1,000, by outworking every man who thought she'd give up. I'll give you till midnight, I said firmly. Sign the sale, and walk away with dignity. Or don't, and by morning, I'll own it anyway. The contracts are already with your creditors. Jed gritted his teeth. You want to humiliate me in front of everyone? No, I said. I want to end this. And I want to start my next chapter in this house on my terms. Just then, little Ellie, Jed's 8-year-old granddaughter, stepped forward. She wore the same kind of patched coat I used to wear. Her big brown eyes looked up at me with no anger, no fear. You're not really taking it from us, are you? She asked. I bent down gently and met her at eye level. No, sweetheart, I said. I'm taking back what was always mine to earn. I stood and turned once more to the grown-ups who thought they still ruled the room. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even want it, I said. What I want is that barn cleaned out, because this time, it's you who'll be sleeping in it. As I left the room, the envelope still unopened on the table, my boots echoed down the hallway like thunder, and, for the first time in this house, I didn't feel small. I felt legendary. The snow outside thickened by the time I stepped out onto the porch. Behind me, the house buzzed with whispers. My name passed between lips that used to only speak it with disdain. The same voices that once told me I was lucky just to be fed. I stood on the edge of the porch, staring at the barn across the field. That creaky old structure was once my prison, my shelter, my confessional booth. It had housed every tear, every journal page, every unspoken prayer of my youth. I wasn't just buying back a ranch. I was reclaiming a graveyard of memories and resurrecting them on my terms. I had almost made it to my truck when a familiar voice called out, "Amanda." I turned slowly. Behind me stood Caleb Grant, the only person in the Dowson household who had ever treated me like I was human. Jed's cousin, a stable boy once. Now, quiet rancher with strong hands and the kind of eyes that didn't judge. He jogged toward me through the snow, his coat half-buttoned, scarf flapping in the wind. "I heard everything," he said breathlessly. "You always do." I smirked. He didn't laugh. Instead, he looked at me with something deeper than surprise. "You sure about this?" I nodded. "Dead sure." Caleb looked down at the snow for a second, then back at me. "You know, there were nights I heard you crying in that barn, when the others were asleep." I froze. "I wanted to do more," he said, "but back then, I was barely more than a kid myself, and they threatened to throw me out too." I placed a hand on his arm. "You didn't have to save me, Caleb. I learned to save myself." A long silence passed. Then he said quietly, "Well, if you ever get tired of doing everything alone, I still fix fences better than most." I gave him the softest smile I could manage. Good to know. Back inside the house, time was ticking like a drum. Mama Dowson sat with her old lawyer, Mr. Peters, an oily man who used to draft wills and whisper secrets. Jed was pacing. Aunt Melanie downed her fourth glass of wine, and the rest of the family lingered like vultures, unsure whether the feast was over or just beginning. "I won't be chased off my land," Jed barked, tossing papers. "This land belongs to the one who can hold it," I said as I entered again. "And your grip's slipping, Mr. Peters." Cleared his throat. "Legally speaking, if the creditors accept her payment by midnight, the ranch changes hands. Cleanly, Amanda's offer is more than fair." Mama Dowson's lip trembled. "She's a girl. She was nothing. She was your mistake," Mr. Peters said dryly. Jed snapped toward him. "You're supposed to be on our side." "I'm on the side that pays me," Peters replied, folding his briefcase. In that moment, Rebecca, the cousin who once stuffed mud in my boots as a child, stood up, her voice brittle. "She'll change everything. Turn this place into some feminist rescue ranch." "What happens to tradition?" I looked her in the eyes. "Tradition died the day you let a child freeze in a barn to protect your image." It was past PM now. By the time the last signature was inked, the house had fallen into a kind of ceremonial silence, funeral-like. I didn't celebrate, not yet. This wasn't a victory parade. It was a reckoning. They had signed over the ranch, everything, the cattle, the land, the estate, the name carved into the front gate, Dowson Crest. It was mine, legally, financially, and poetically. I walked into the old sitting room. Nothing had changed in a decade. The curtains still smelled like cinnamon and dust. The rug was the same one I had once scrubbed clean on my knees while the family had laughed over cider in the next room. Only now, I walked across it in polished leather boots worth more than Melanie's entire jewelry drawer. On the mantel sat a tin box. I recognized it instantly, Mama Dowson's memory tin, where she kept heirloom photos and letters. Curious, I opened it. Inside, I found a photo of me, age 9, standing barefoot beside the barn. My hair was tangled, my shirt torn, but I smiled, because even then, I had hope. Beneath the photo was a folded note in Mama Dowson's familiar cursive. "Amanda, Jed didn't want to keep you. I convinced him to. Not for kindness, but because I knew you'd work. And you did." My fingers trembled as I folded the note back in. Not from anger, but from clarity. They hadn't loved me. They'd used me, and that was worse. In the dining room, the family had scattered like ants after a storm. Aunt Melanie was muttering to herself, eyes glossy. Cousin Rebecca refused to meet my eyes. Mama Dowson sat rigid in a chair, sipping cold tea as if it were poison. But it was Jed who surprised me. He approached slowly, hands behind his back, like he was carrying something too heavy to hold. "You win," he said. I looked at him. This wasn't a game. He nodded, face hardening. "Then why does it feel like I lost everything?" "Because you held on to power," I said, "but let go of people." He looked at me long and strange, like he'd never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe he never wanted to. "I'll have movers come in the morning," Jed said. "I'll be gone by dawn." "Take your time," I said evenly. "There's no need to run. Not unless your guilt's heavier than your luggage." He didn't answer, just nodded and walked toward the door. Halfway there, he stopped and said over his shoulder, "You turned out more Dowson than any of us." I stared at his back. "No," I replied. "I turned out better." Later that night, after the house had emptied and the snow had quieted everything, I walked back to the barn, not as a girl, not as a servant, but as the owner. Inside, nothing had changed. The cot I used to sleep on was still there, my initials carved into the post, still deep. I sat on the edge of that cot and listened to the wind whistle through the cracks, and I cried, not because I was sad, but because I was free. I stayed there until midnight. Then I walked back to the house, the big, warm house I had been locked out of all those winters, and turned off every light myself, one switch at a time. Each click in the dark felt like closing a chapter. I wasn't Amanda the orphan anymore. I was Amanda Dowson, ranch owner, self-made, self-earned, unforgiven but undefeated. And on the mantle, under the family portrait, I left a new frame, a photo of me, age 28, standing in front of my own herd. No tears, no rags, only triumph. The morning after Christmas dawned slow and gray. The kind of sky that doesn't promise anything, just hovers above you like a breath held too long. I didn't sleep much. I didn't need to. I was wide awake in a way I hadn't been in years. I sat at the long wooden kitchen table, the same one they'd never let me eat at. My coffee mug steamed in front of me, and across from me sat my lawyer, Miss Corbin, a woman in her 50s with hair like cold steel and eyes that read between lines. "Final paperwork's in order," she said, flipping through a leather folder. "Deed is transferred. Ranch and estate taxes prepaid through next year. Full title is yours." I nodded, lips barely moving. "Good. You want to rename it?" The question sat in the air like fog. I thought about it. For 10 years, it had been Dowson Crest. But that name Dowson was soaked in silence, arrogance, and barnwood shame. I looked at her. "No," I said. "Let the name stay, but let everyone remember who changed what it meant." Later that afternoon, the last of the Dowsons packed up. Aunt Melanie left with her husband, neither of them daring to look at me. Rebecca left behind her fur coat, accidentally or not. I donated it to the stable boys, and Mama Dowson and her gray wool coat and perfectly pinned brooch stood beside the truck for a long time. "I never hated you," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I know," I said. "You just never loved me." Her fingers clutched the handle. "You remind me too much of her." "Who?" "Your mother." It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged her. "Was she strong?" I asked. "She was a storm." Mama Dowson stepped into the truck without another word and drove away. I was alone now, utterly, completely, but not lonely. That evening, I took a walk across the fields. The snow was high and undisturbed. The cattle were quiet, and the wind was low. I reached the northern ridge, the spot where I used to sneak away and dream. Back when I was 14, I had buried a box there, a show box. I never told anyone. I knelt down and brushed away the snow, dug with my gloves. When my fingers touched metal, I exhaled like I'd found buried treasure. Inside the box were 4 things: a broken locket Mama Dowson had thrown out, a sketch of a big ranch house I'd drawn on butcher paper, a single dollar bill I had earned mucking stalls, a note I wrote to myself at 15. "Dear future me, if you're reading this, then you made it. They said you'd never be more than a mistake. But maybe mistakes grow stronger than roots. Maybe barns build queens. And maybe, just maybe, you bought the ranch. If you did, don't ever forget who you were, or what they tried to bury. Merry Christmas." I pressed the note to my chest, eyes stinging. I hadn't just bought the land. I had earned every inch of it with scars no one could see. Later, I ordered new plaques for the front gates. They read, "Dowson Crest Ranch owned by Amanda Dowson, built in pain, ruled in peace." I also reinstated old workers who had been fired for speaking out. I gave them warm beds, honest wages, and free meals. One of them, Elias Harper, was in tears. "No one's ever stood up for us like this," he said. I smiled. "That's because the people who stood here before me never had to sleep where we did. The revenge wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It echoed in the quiet respect. In warm coffee shared with workers. In the letters I wrote forgiving those who never apologized. In the barn I refurbished into a library for all the kids who feel like outsiders at the dinner table, and most of all it echoed in my heart, finally beating for me." The first Sunday after I claimed the ranch, I invited the entire county for a Christmas breakfast. It wasn't for spectacle. I wasn't showing off. I just wanted people to feel what I had longed for: a seat at the table. We served hot cider, cornmeal pancakes, cinnamon bacon, and scrambled eggs so fluffy they melted on your tongue. I made sure the barn was decorated with hand-painted garlands and real pine wreaths. Everyone came, not because I was Amanda Dowson, owner of Dowson Crest, but because word had spread about the girl who had slept in the hayloft and now ran the land. Midway through the meal, a little girl about 10 tugged on my coat. She wore hand-me-down boots and had a gap between her front teeth. "Miss Dowson," she asked softly, "how did you get this big ranch if no one gave it to you?" I crouched beside her and said, "Because I decided I'd never let being unwanted stop me from becoming unstoppable." She blinked. "That's a big word," I grinned. "So's forgiveness. That comes next." Later that evening, after the guests left, I returned to the main house. A letter was waiting on the front step, folded into a soft cream envelope with no name. Inside was a short note: "You've made your point, but the family is still hurting. We're not asking for money, just mercy. Rebecca." I stared at her name. 10 years ago, she'd been the one who'd laughed when I was made to eat alone in the stables, who wore my mother's old scarf, and told people it had always been hers. But 10 years can change people. I didn't reply to the note. Instead, I wrote one of my own. "Mercy is not weakness, but it must be earned. Come work the land for a season. Get your hands dirty. Maybe then, the barn will feel more like a beginning than a punishment." I left it at the post office addressed to her apartment in Cherry Lane. The next week, I started interviewing architects, not for a mansion, for a school. Dowson Crest was going to fund a learning center for girls like me, girls tossed aside, shut out of homes, and told they didn't belong at the table. The name? Hayloft Hall. I wanted every inch of that building to remind young girls that barns can be beginnings, not banishments. One evening, as I reviewed drafts in the library, Elias walked in holding a dusty old photo. "You should see this," he said. It was an old black and white image, maybe from the 1920s. A girl, no older than 15, sat on a hay bale, hair tied back, chin up, pride in her eyes. "She looks like you," Elias added. On the back, scribbled in pencil, L. Dowson, first girl to run cattle during the war. I turned the photo over, speechless. She had my nose, my cheekbones, my fire. "She's your ancestor," Elias said. "They just never talked about her." It hit me like a snowstorm. They didn't hate strong women, they were afraid of them. They buried our names, erased our stories, until now. I framed the photo and hung it in the dining hall, right where the old portrait of Jed used to be, and I left a plaque beneath it that read, "Let no girl be forgotten again." That night, the wind howled across the ranch like an old ghost finally let free. I stood on the front porch, arms folded, breath clouding the air. This land had tried to bury me, but the roots they tried to drown had grown deeper. I wasn't just the owner now. I was the legacy they tried to erase. And I wasn't done yet. It was early January when I received a letter wrapped in brown wax paper. The envelope was thick, the handwriting shaky and elegant. I recognized it before I opened it: Grandfather Dowson. I hadn't seen him since I was 17, the night I was made to sleep in the barn during the Christmas ball while he toasted family under a chandelier I wasn't allowed near. Inside the envelope was a single page. "Amanda, I've watched from afar. I know I failed you, but not just you. I failed the legacy of this land. I built it on control, not care. I taught my sons to be proud, but not kind. And I let the best parts of our name rot behind doors locked by silence." He went on to say he was dying, that he had rewritten his own will, leaving me an old plot of land in the northern hills that no one cared about anymore. "But it's where your real story begins," he wrote, curious. I rode out that same afternoon. It was a long, cold ride. The northern hills had once belonged to migrant workers, and for decades the Dowsons had used it for cheap grazing, never developing, never investing. But as I reached the top of the highest hill, I saw something that made me stop cold: a cemetery, dozens of weathered stones, crooked and forgotten, names barely visible. Some graves were marked with simple rocks, others with hand-carved wooden crosses. One stone read, Lydia Grace, beloved daughter 190 to 1917. That name again, Lydia, the same girl from the photograph, the same fire in her eyes. I fell to my knees in the snow. These were the daughters the Dowsons erased, the women who built the ranch while the men took credit. Their names never made the family wall. Their graves were hidden behind hills and cattle fences. I whispered their names as I could read them: Ruth, Elsie, Belle, Clara, and then I made a promise. You won't be forgotten again. I returned home and called a meeting with the local council. I wanted to convert the Northern Hill into a historical memorial for women and girls who worked the land but were never honored. Elias helped me draft the proposal. Miss Corbin managed the legal permissions. I funded it with part of the ranch's winter cattle profits. No donors, no outside sponsors, just me and my past. On the first stone we restored, I added an engraving beneath the name. She slept in the barn, but rose with the sun. That night, I lit a lantern and stood at the center of the barn where I had once been locked out of Christmas. It was warmer now, refurbished into a community space for kids and workers. A 12-year-old named Molly asked if she could hang her drawing on the barn wall. It was a picture of a girl standing on a snowy hill, holding a golden key. Who is she? I asked. You, she said. The girl who opened the door. My heart folded in on itself. That drawing now hangs in the front office of Hayloft Hall, next to the photo of Lydia Grace. By the end of January, Dowson Crest was no longer just a ranch. It was a revolution. I hired more women than ever before, raised wages, turned the old servants' quarters into a dormitory for single mothers, and reintroduced old family heirlooms with their real histories intact, including the iron cooking pots my mother once used, the silver spurs worn by Lydia in the winter of 1915, and the torn scarf I found in the attic with initials embroidered faintly. Aid Amanda Dowson, mine, but maybe not just mine. Maybe all of us who had to climb out of barns while others feasted inside. I wasn't seeking revenge anymore. Not really. I was seeking restoration. And in every silent hallway, in every snowy trail, in every word unspoken until now, I was reclaiming voices that had once been drowned by money, pride, and fear. February swept in like a quiet storm, and with it came the invitation I never expected. It was cream-colored, heavy stocked paper, sealed with wax. The calligraphy was unmistakable. The Dowson family reunion. My first reaction? Laughter. The kind that burns on the way up. A reunion? From a family who once pretended I didn't exist beyond stall mucking and hay feeding. From those who let me sleep through blizzards on the loft beams while they danced under chandeliers. But as I stared at the envelope longer, I didn't see cruelty, I saw opportunity. So I arfed with one word: attending. The day arrived with silver skies and frost curling on windows. The old Dowson manor, now nothing more than a relic of pride, hadn't aged well. The shutters hung tired, the front porch creaked. The white paint had dulled into the color of dust. Inside, however, every inch had been polished for the event. I could almost hear the echo of my own footsteps as I stepped through the front hall. I wore navy velvet, nothing extravagant, just strong, clean lines, the same way I'd built my life. When I entered the dining room, silence spread like spilled wine. Uncle Ron's fork clattered onto his plate. Aunt Muriel blinked so hard I feared she'd faint into the gravy. Even Rebecca, once the golden daughter of the Dowsons, had to press her lips together to avoid showing surprise. Only one person stood to greet me: grandfather, leaning on his cane, face pale but alive. He nodded and gestured to the empty seat. At the head of the table. Amanda, he said, voice thin, this place was never a home without you. For a long moment, I didn't speak. My heart thundered in my chest. Then I walked to that chair and sat. Dinner was tense. They made small talk: weather, wheat prices, and winter calves. But the tension hovered in the air, thick as cream. Then somewhere between the peach pie and silence, grandfather cleared his throat. I've made arrangements, he said slowly, to transfer the title deed of Dowson Manor to Amanda. Gasps echoed. Someone dropped their spoon. What? Rebecca nearly hissed. You said it would be split, I said. Grandfather interrupted. that it would go to the one who honored the land. He looked down the table. She never asked for riches. She just took care of what we abandoned. It wasn't about the manor. It never was. It was about acknowledgement, that for once they saw me, and not as a mistake, not as a servant, but as what I had become, a Dowson, by grit not name. After the dinner, Rebecca approached me in the hallway. You know they'll never truly accept you, she said softly. I don't need them to, I replied. I don't need acceptance to own what's mine. She hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photo. It was of two girls, me and her when we were 7. Before the cruelty, before the walls, before the barn. I kept this, she said, handing it over. In case you ever came back. I took it, not with anger, but with something that surprised me, peace. The next morning, I walked through the barn one last time. The light streamed in through the slats, turning the dust into glitter. I touched the wooden beam, where I used to hang my coat. The same place where, years ago, I'd etched my initials. Those same initials now marked the deed, the school, the trust, the future. I thought about Lydia Grace, about the girls buried on the northern hill, about the ones still growing, still fighting, still sleeping in barns while others dined inside, and I whispered to the wind, we're inside now, all of us. I didn't come for revenge, I came for restoration, but somehow, I'd earned both, and all it took was one cold Christmas night, and a girl no one believed in. Christmas Eve came again, 10 years to the day since I last sat alone in a freezing barn while the Dowsons toasted champagne just yards away. This time, the fire was mine, the house was mine, the land, the livestock, the legacy all mine. I didn't host a ball, I hosted a supper. And no crystal chandeliers or orchestras, just warm cider, cornbread, fresh beef stew, and homemade pies. My table was long and wooden, built from old barnwood I had salvaged myself. At that table sat Elias, my foreman and best friend, Miss Corbin, now retired but still sharp as a tack, little Molly, the orphan I'd taken in after her parents died in a prairie fire, and 10 ranch hands with rough hands and golden hearts. No Dowsons. No hierarchy, just a family I had chosen. After dinner, I walked out onto the porch. The snow fell soft and slow. Lanterns flickered on fence posts. The stars above seemed lower, somehow closer. I could see the old barn from here, the very same barn where I once laid on straw, trembling from cold and shame, too young to fight, too proud to cry. But tonight, I smiled. That barn was now a school, the Dowson School for Rural Girls, built in my name, funded by cattle, justice, and a bit of stubborn revenge. At midnight, I walked back inside. In the main hall stood a towering Christmas tree, decorated not with gold but with handmade ornaments from the children who now called this ranch their home. One ornament caught my eye, a wooden star, carved with the words, "For the girl who lit the barn." I held it in my hand and felt years of pain turn to peace. Later that night, as the fire dimmed, I opened the ledger. The official transfer of the Dowson Trust had been finalized. I hadn't just bought the ranch, I had taken over the family's $5 million estate, restructured it, and turned it into a community cooperative. Every worker now had a share. The ones who once made me sleep outside, they were still alive, still rich, still bitter, but they now lived on a land whose gates I opened every morning. People often ask me what revenge feels like. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like freedom. It feels like walking through a door that was always locked until you build your own key. 3 weeks later, I received a letter postmarked from New Orleans. It was from Rebecca. Amanda, I'm pregnant. I want to raise my daughter to be strong, not proud, not cruel. Can I bring her to meet you? I wrote back only one word, yes. On New Year's Day, a small carriage pulled up the lane. Rebecca stepped out, wrapped in a wool coat, holding the hand of a little girl. They entered the house without fear. And no one stopped them. No one sneered, because this house no longer held ghosts. It held light. We sat by the fire. I gave her daughter a small package. Inside was a silver hairpin, my mother's. I want her to have it, I said. She'll be better than all of us, Rebecca whispered. I nodded. She already is. That night, for the first time in a decade, the Dowson name meant something again. Not power, not shame, but hope. And somewhere in the barn-turned schoolhouse, above the chalkboard, is a sign that reads, "No one sleeps in the cold here. Not anymore. Not ever again." Final questions for the reader. Would you have returned to the house that once locked you out? Is revenge sweeter when it heals instead of hurts? Or does justice come quietly, when no one sees it coming? Subscribe to more revenge stories. Share, like, comment.